Good morning. Oh, come on. I know it's day 3 and we're all hanging on by a string, but we'll try again. Good morning. There we go. I'm Kyle Daigle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of GitHub. I'm so excited to be here with you on day 3. I'm honored to be maybe 1 or 2 people speaking about AI this week. Obviously, we're all here. Every session's an AI session in some small way. GitHub has always been the home for all developers. Whether you're working in open source, you're creating a startup, working on a side project or a side hustle, or if you're one of the many customers that are using us at work in a Fortune 500 or a global multinational company, we're all builders. We're all developers working on something every day. And when we're at our best, developers are powering the world more and more. They're the real enablers of human progress. I'm a developer myself. I've been at GitHub for over 10 years. I made the jump to the evil business side 5 years ago to try to solve problems over here. But when you look back at GitHub's history over the 15 years it's been together, we're always trying to make developers more productive, happier, bringing the pull requests to you, bringing things like Copilot. And our goal at GitHub is to accelerate human progress through developer collaboration. Of course, collaboration is central to how GitHub works, both as a product, but also as a company. When GitHub started, one of its key principles wasn't just, sort of the open sourceification of the world, or let's work asynchronously and let's let people live where they want to live and work remote. We also had a very strong stance on, let's change how product companies work. Let's not just sort of work like everyone else works. Let's invest in our people. Let's let people work when they want to work in the day. In a lot of ways, that culture has permeated all of GitHub. So even for folks that aren't developers at GitHub, if you're in HR or you're in finance or you're in SELA, you're starting by creating an issue. If you want to change a piece of documentation discussing how you're going to get your reimbursement for coming to reInvent, you can just do a pull request in our docs and it'll be pushed up to the site. So we brought that collaboration model to the entirety of GitHub, and we all live it day to day. And so we've seen what we do with this collaboration model, but over the years we've seen what you all can do when you can collaborate more easily and more effectively as a team. And so since 2008, I think we've really embodied this collaboration culture at GitHub, and we've taken it and we've exported that culture to the world via our product and things like Git Flow back in the good days. And we've also shared a lot of best practices on the best ways to use GitHub to collaborate as developers. This whole group, and presumably if you've been at reInvent, we were all part of one revolution, which was the introduction of the cloud in 2006, with AWS kicking that off and then more companies joining in as we go. GitHub was founded in 2008, a couple of years after that, and you can see over this short period of time how much has changed. And then I think if we look back, around 2013, there was another big moment, in my opinion, to software developers. And that was JavaScript kind of becoming the lingua franca for software. If you knew JavaScript, right, you could basically build anything you wanted to some degree. There was a huge boom in open source projects. The Electron project came out. The beast of serverless and Lambda and functions all created. It was a huge moment for devs. And I think we're clearly at another one of these moments in 22 and 2023, and that's the age of AI. So quickly, the world has changed. We talk about like dog years, and this last year has clearly felt probably like 3 or 4 years in our careers, Things have been moving so quickly. And we're at a moment where we're all talking about AI to some degree, right? We're talking about how to use it. Your boss or your boss's boss, your CEO or the board of directors, the chairman is telling you, add AI to your product, figure out how to do it, right? For better or for worse. And people can't add AI buttons or chat to their apps fast enough. And so we're in this huge evolution. And at GitHub, a big part of my job is figuring out how to enable Hubbers, our employees, to do their best work. And clearly we think AI can play a big part of that, both for our developers, but then for all the other work, whether you're a developer or a non-developer in your day-to-day. So we tend to want to look at data first. I'm sure most of us are a little bit skeptical, and so we've done a lot of research over the past 2 years to understand, what are developers saying and actually doing for both, their day-to-day work and for their businesses, and the results are pretty clear. ultimately, developers are using AI in your companies day to day, whether it's official or not. We talk to so many customers that say a version of, well, we're getting going and we're starting and we're on a journey and there's a council that's working on Gen AI and they're figuring it out. But unless you're blocking it at the network level, which some companies are doing, ultimately, we're being told that you're using tools to some degree every day as a developer. And so if you're not blocking them outright, you're using tools like Jasper, you're using tools like Copilot, you're using tools like ChatGPT, Superhuman AI if you use that tool, Notion AI, kind of so on and so forth. Because developers, we will always find a way to become more productive. We can make our editors more efficient, we find the right tools, we find the right open source. And so because of that, we're on this never-ending journey to find those new pathways for growth, in part because we are more collaborative than we've ever been. Our survey shows that enterprise devs, when you're working in a business context, when you work on a project, you're working with, on average, 21 other developers to complete that project. Doesn't mean every team is 21 people, but in order to ship anything of note, you have to work with a much larger team. And in this research, the other piece of information we got was that developers want to be measured in performance reviews based on the quality of their collaboration as the top measure. They want to be measured on collaboration over things like code quality or speed to production or other measures that engineering organizations frequently measure their developers on. I think this is kind of clear for us if you worked in a developer team. Experienced developers know collaboration can make the biggest difference on making a breakthrough, getting things into production faster. And surprisingly to me, AI is helping you collaborate more. 4 out of 5 developers are saying that AI tools are making them more collaborative. Now think about that for a second. That's 80% of devs saying that this AI tool, this chatbot, this code gen tool is making them more collaborative. And I gotta be honest, when the team that was doing the research in our group put this together, I honestly expected the opposite result, right? I was expecting, well, AI is going to help developers code faster at night in their room like you do, and then you're gonna push up this mega pull request that someone's gonna hate to review, and they're gonna check it and it'll go to production, right? But that's not actually what we're seeing at all. AI is making developers and more people across our businesses more collaborative because it frees up more of their time to work on the more complex, interesting problem. No developer wants to ship the same web app, the same CRUD app over and over at every business that they're in. They want to do novel solutions. They want to spend time talking with their peers on the right architecture or the right approach or the right library to use. And all of that requires human thought and human collaboration. And so with AI, we're inevitably creating more time now to take these opportunities to collaborate. And those were sort of just impossible a couple years ago. And we have all the stats from the customers that are using this. A lot of folks come to me and they'll say, well, if we're producing code 55% faster, everyone has some stat in the 50% range saying, they're making code a lot more quickly than they were before. But downstream, we're seeing that if Copilot wrote the code in a pull request at Duolingo, they say that their code review times are 67% faster because they're using code that was collaborated with others and used via AI. Interestingly, most interesting to me is that for Accenture, they experienced 45% increase in first green builds in CI. So you push up your PR, your build fails, you made a mistake somewhere in the system, and you make a fix. But instead of having all these more PRs coming through AI and things getting slower, it's actually getting faster. AI is having these secondary impacts down the line that kind of go counter to some of the wisdom that we hear from leaders and engineering managers, which is there's so much more coming through the pipe. Now I'm gonna have to fix my build systems, pipeline deploy systems, and that hasn't proven to be true for the vast majority of our customers. And I think most importantly for us at GitHub, it's making developers happier. It's letting them do what they finally want to be doing. 60 to 75% of developers that we talked to said that AI is making them feel more fulfilled, more focused, less frustrated in their day-to-day work. And this makes sense because if you're a developer, the more time you can spend in flow where you're just writing code, the better output that you're gonna have. You're gonna be able to accomplish a lot more. And that's a win for developers, of course, because developers are at the heart of GitHub, but ultimately, every business is some sort of software business. And so they're able to get these enormous increases. By focusing on making developers more productive, increasing collaboration, and helping them innovate by giving them more time to solve difficult problems, not the problems that have been solved over and over and over again. So this technology is evolving so fast. I think the thing that we can kind of get caught up in, or the buying folks, or the security folks, the compliance folks in your organizations is, well, how can you even start with this? How do you even get going? And I think the thing that we work with all of our customers on so much is you need to start small and measure, but then you have to adopt and quickly. Because we see small companies doing this very quickly, we'll talk about that in a second. We see larger companies figuring out how to work through regulation and compliance relatively quickly in order to get their work done. And they're seeing the benefits. There was an interesting study from IDC that was released, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, that said, by their measure, for every dollar that's invested in an AI solution, there's a $3.5 return on that $1 investment. That's an enormous return. And so while there are a lot of folks planning to take advantage of this revolution and trying to come up with this holistic strategy, a lot of the folks in this room, a lot of the startups, a lot of the earlier companies are jumping and taking advantage of it right now. So today, I want to go through some real-world examples about how AI is being used both for developers and across the business. We'll start with examples from GitHub. Then I'm going to welcome Eric Peterson, the founder of Cloud Zero, to talk about how his team's using AI as they build and support their customers' cloud cost optimization. And then we'll wrap up with Scott McVicker, head of developer infrastructure at Stripe, about how they're using AI to focus on developer productivity. So let's start by talking about AI at GitHub. There's a lot of work that Hubbers, our employees, do that is not in the editor and the command line. It's the day-to-day work, and if I want to enable all Hubbers to do their best work, we need to bring AI to more than just developers. We need to bring it to everybody. So we embarked on this journey and we started with IT. Like I mentioned earlier, most of our processes at GitHub are rooted in developer flows. The practices and principles of working on a software project. And so we frequently look to how open source works, right? Because while we were a part of open source, we continue to do a lot with open source. We would like to see, well, how are those communities evolving? And one of the things over the last 7 years that have been huge is that everyone likes to hear good news, but bad news for sure from bots, right? A human going in and saying, this isn't a good PR because of this, that, and the other thing is harder to accept than a robot coming in and saying, hey, Kyle, I'm Hubot. This PR doesn't match my specifications, et cetera. And you just go, ah, stupid bot, and you keep going, right? But you're not feeling that human connection. So we wanted to take a look at that and understand, okay, if we want to keep our employees in flow and we can take this use of a bot, how can we make it so that they're using less tools and getting the support that they need to just do their day-to-day work with IT right where they already are? And so we started this journey where every employee interaction with GitHub and IT starts in chat. We just use Slack. We don't force you to go to Zendesk. We don't have you use another tool. Ultimately, you're already in Slack. We just want you to do it. And so our employees generate about 5,000 inquiries every quarter to our relatively small IT team. So that's an average of about 700 over time, inquiries per quarter per teammate. And so as COO, I don't want that team focused on responding to all these requests. It's a lot of time that's going through this. I need them to spend their time on more strategic initiatives. And so we made this game changer that we've called Octobot through some partners that allow now 30% of all the inquiries that go into IT to be automatically answered by this tool. Now, it's easy to say, okay, well, how do I go and get access to the production VPN? Or I'm traveling, how can I get a travel laptop? Those are pretty straightforward questions. But this goes a step past, because the tool can understand the intent, it has a model underneath it, you could say, I need to reset my two-factor authentication, right? I got a new phone, I didn't do the right swap, Okta's not working the way I wanted it to. It can do complete workflows as well. So instead of generating an IT ticket where someone in IT has to go and look you up in the list and your IDP and make a change, it can do all of that verification automatically. Or the happiest day in a dev's life, you're up for a laptop upgrade. What laptop do you want and where do you want it shipped, right? That entire flow can be proactive and completely automated via this tool. And so with Octobot, we've been able to take back about 25 hours per week for our IT support team by putting this completely in flow and not creating a net new system that we're rolling out the best way to interact, it's this new support portal where there'd be a much larger amount of behavior change. And this has given our employees about 3 hours a week back immediately in a very short period of time. So that's thousands of inquiries that have been handled immediately and effectively and given team time back to the IT staff. So now I'm putting them, of course, on other tools that they could potentially roll out, and from a software mindset where we're treating it just like software. This doesn't need to be a big process and change initiative. It can be just like you would test an open source library. Will this work? Let's give it a go on a small project. We'll measure it, give it time, 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, 60 days, and then we can put it into the entire process. So this is a testament, I think, of how we can streamline the process and save time and give employees more time back. And I think, interestingly, it also increased our satisfaction score up to 98% for our employees. That's a 12% increase since we were adding this tool. So it's not just a number, it's a fact that our employees feel like it's better now that they're interacting with this AI in addition to the human support, rather than simply looking just at the human support. So we've gained efficiency and consistency in the response back. We're streamlining and automating the regular tasks that happen in this process. We're giving time back to both our employees that are asking questions. You no longer have to ask a question, wait for someone to come back to you when they have a chance, right? They can do it immediately. And then, of course, on our side, we're also able to give that time back to our IT staff, which lets them do, again, more creative work. And I think most importantly, we're delivering an exceptional employee experience. We want folks to feel great about using this tool, not pissed off when the bot responds in a way that's not actually valuable, to them. And so in those cases, we can just push it straight to a human, and that human can immediately engage, again, all in a Slack thread. And so this is one of the ways that we're working on improving AI across the business. I think another one is a really underestimated piece of value from AI, and that's learning right on the job. Of course, we talk to developers, and so with half-day offsites or Zoom training requirements or various corporate training flows, it's very easy to see how skills development is very hard to do on the job. And if anyone's ever done a company-wide survey, you have some result that says, I would like more time to do learning and development at work, right? So you create a learning and development program, and then that takes more time on top of the work. And so 30% of devs are saying that simply by having all that, it's actually making my life a little bit worse because I don't have time to do the learning that I want to do and the work that's going to help me day to day. And so as a leader and a manager, the best case scenario is you're able to help your staff learn while they're doing their work rather than as a separate added activity that adds a little bit of employee tax. And so for us, when we look at Copilot, it's not just in the IDE, it's not just chat, we're also looking at other surfaces like the CLI. So like in this example, this is GitHub Copilot CLI. Git may be ubiquitous, but if you're a dev, you have a story about swearing at your computer because you can't remember how to do bisect correctly or something like that, right? And so in this tool, you can say, well, how do I do this activity? And then when it's not quite right, Copilot can help you refine and ask again, like, okay, I'm understanding it, but what's the right flag, or how do I switch to ascending or descending? And this is all happening, learning, while you're sitting there and just doing your sort of day-to-day work in the CLI. This will work for basically anything that you're doing in the CLI, including GitHub's CLI tool as well. I think this learning on the job is so important because it keeps developers further in flow state, right? You're not going to Google to ask, well, how do I do this? You're not bugging your coworker next to you or over Slack or Teams or Zoom. And that's a key tenet of good AI. Good AI is helping you without introducing any net new behaviors to you. So I want to show you another example that goes a little bit deeper into this learning side. A couple weeks ago, I got a ping from an internal system on a repository I wrote 10 years ago, asking me to make a change to meet some new requirement on a language move. I assure you I am no longer the right person to make that change. But I was curious to go in and say, well, could I? Back then I believe it was Ruby 2.1. I think we're on Ruby 3.2 at GitHub right now. Big change in Rails versions from a very bespoke version of Rails to now Rails mainline. And so what I did is I used Copilot. So I can't show you the company code, so I'm using an example from a repository that I actually created open source. You can go to my GitHub and see this. From many, many moons ago, same thing. I worked and ran the ecosystem and API group at GitHub for about 6 years. And this is a little app that helps you test GitHub webhooks. So if you ever want to know what does the payload look like. And I wanted to go through and understand what this is. So the first question I asked above, you saw the response stream in, it was just basically, what does this thing do? Like, just walk me back through it so I remember. The next one was I was using Mongo Mapper. At GitHub, we generally use MySQL for everything, and so I wanted to switch it to MySQL. So I asked it, well, how would I go about making that switch? And it walks me through it, and it ultimately gives me some stack of code to say, hey, after you make this change, it would look like this. At this point, I'm not making any edits. I'm just trying to page in information like you would when you go to a repo that you've never used before. One of the things that, if you're familiar with Rails or whatever, there's pluralize, but the thing that I can never remember is pluralize in Rails, or is it in Ruby? Was it added to Ruby and when? And so I could just ask in line to say, okay, like, is there a clearer way to write this thing or not? And then ultimately, I can continue to ask questions about, is this code, effective, or should I make a change, or what version is this in? Is pluralize in this version or not? I think the interesting thing when we talk about learning and being in flow with learning is I think a lot of folks go either, oh, this will be very helpful for earlier on developers. You have to know what questions to ask, and that takes a little bit of knowledge, but it'll be helpful for those folks. What we've found since we've gone out is that it is incredibly helpful for some of the most senior folks, because those are the folks that you parachute into projects that no one's touched in 5 years, but is critical to your system, or is a bus factor of 2. And then they're saying, hey, so I don't know if you've used COBOL ever in your career, but do you mind taking a look at this? Because we're trying to get rid of it in our system. That customer conversation happens, I don't know, once a week at least. Or going from Java to a new version of Java, or leaving Scala behind and so on and so forth. And so it's not just a tool for folks that are trying to get up to speed in dev or get up to speed in your tech stack. It's an easy way for everyone on your team to learn a new skill while they're doing their work, not as a completely separate activity. So I want to give a little bit of advice just on sort of what I've seen both in implementing GitHub and in talking to customers about both rolling out AI to your companies or using AI in your day-to-day work, or adding AI to your own applications and businesses, because we're all being asked to do that too. The first thing I would say is start now. Learn immediately. Don't wait until it's all been figured out or wait for the moment where it's crystallized. That moment will not come. By the time it comes, you'll be so far behind. And so get started because your competitors are, startups are, et cetera. Don't underestimate the power of learning via AI. I think that's one of the things that folks that buy it and use Copilot, they go, oh my goodness, this is amazing. It's helping me and my devs get upskilled or get used to our tech stack because we do things very weird here. Very common thing to hear. That's a superpower of AI that I think is underestimated. And the last one that I think is probably the most important is AI tools need to stay in flow. They should not, if possible, introduce net new behavior. If they do, it should be very minimal, because otherwise adoption goes way down and the enablement cost of helping people understand how to use the tools goes way, way up. So that's GitHub. But I love learning from more real world examples. And so I wanted to make sure we brought up some other folks to kind of tell you their story as well. So I want to start by welcoming the CTO, CISO, and founder of Cloud Zero, Eric Peterson.
All right.
Hey, sir.
Hey, thanks, Kyle.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Good morning, everyone.
Okay, so first off, can you tell us a little bit about Cloud Zero, you, and...
Oh, gosh. All right, how much time do we have? Right. Let me
There's
tell
a
you.
clock.
Yeah, there's one important thing. Cloud Zero, when I founded the company in 2016, was built on a really simple principle, which is that we live in this cloud-driven world where every engineering decision is really a buying decision. Mm-hmm. And how can we get the folks who are building the systems, making those kind of buying decisions, to make really efficient buying decisions? Mm-hmm. Because then you're going to build profitable systems. So I was obsessed with this idea about this new kind of way of thinking about performance and building well-architected systems. And it's a hell of a thing to do to try to solve your problems by founding a company. I don't recommend it for anybody, but if you're interested, come talk to me. I love to help people to get started. But it was an interesting journey, to say the least.
Awesome. So when we chatted the last time, we were talking about bringing AI to the company, and you brought it in. But also, you're really passionate about 5 minutes to production. Can you tell us about what that means? And...
Yeah.
how that was a part of it?
This is religion for us. So I think any company, no matter how big you are, but really, as a startup, you're trying to move fast. You're trying to think about innovating and getting ideas out there and testing them in the world. And we put together a kind of a mantra in our minds that we should always be 5 minutes from production, right? What that means is we're 5 minutes away from fixing a bug. We're 5 minutes away from testing an idea. We're 5 minutes away of proving that that was a bad idea, right? We're 5 minutes away of rolling it back. And it means so much to the developer from a user experience perspective. When I think back over the last 7 years, I mean, we've probably shaved, it feels like years of time actually, right? When you don't have to worry about that. And so we stick true to that. And honestly, GitHub has been at the center of that. So big thank you, because our process we never would have been able to achieve that if we wouldn't be able to build that on top of everything.
I'm curious, how have you been able to, entropy happens and things get more complex. And so 5 minutes of production, I'm sure some folks in here are like, yes, it's a great pipe dream, or it works great at a small scale, but you've grown a fair bit. And so how have you been able to keep that going?
I mean, it's interesting. It creates kind of, I like to think of it as evolutionary pressure in the right direction to push the team to think differently. So they, when a code base starts getting a little bit bigger, it gets a little bit kind of nasty looking, and you start to think, well, maybe we should roll back on this idea. And you go, well, maybe we should refactor. Like, maybe we should rethink. Maybe it's the right time to break this out. It's getting a little bit long in the tooth. And it pushes the team to think a little bit differently about the code, break it up, be very, kind of independent in how we build these features. And that's had a really interesting effect on our architecture. We did a couple of other things that have been really interesting. We went all in on kind of a serverless technology stack, 100% Lambda compute, actually. And every time we think about going in a different direction, we're like, no, we can build this way, and we can stick true to this 5 minutes to production and go from like idea to reality and really fast. And we're hooked on that. It's almost like a drug. So it drives our architecture, it drives our kind of value stream, and it also kind of sets the cadence for the rest of the product team when we're thinking about the value that we're trying to build ultimately for our customers.
And so speaking of that evolution, one of those potential steps that we were talking together was, how can AI be a part of that? Or how does that help developer collaboration? So I'm curious, when you decided to take a look at Copilot, like how did you start? How did that process go?
People started talking about it. I've been playing with it. I figured, I'll just play with it before the team gets out there and starts looking at it. And so I'm sitting here going, and I had probably a lot of people probably had this kind of reaction. You're writing some code, you're using Copilot, you're playing around with it, and I found myself just laughing. It's a very weird reaction, because you start typing something, and I'm like, how the hell does it know? It's like, that's what I would have written, right? And it just got almost hilarious. Like somebody came by and like, what are you doing? You're writing code and laughing. What is going on? I was like, this is weird. This world is just weird, but this is going to be amazing. And so then I'm like, well, maybe I should suggest this to some of the people on the team. They were ahead of me. I was behind, actually. And they're like, what are you talking about, Eric? We've been doing this we just snuck it in here. We were actually worried that you're going to come and tell us to turn it off. And I said, well, tell me about it. How's it working? And they're like, I don't think we could ever go back to writing code without this. And when I dug into what the team, had started to adopt this and how we were looking at it, we just made it official. We told everyone, hey, you should turn this on. You should go with it. And we use a couple of tools to kind of manage monitor our developer productivity, see how people are going. And we have those stats, right? We looked across the team. We're like, things are going faster, right? Stuff is happening a little bit quicker. Why is that? And our most senior engineers actually were moving super fast, right? Because they just seemed to have an idea in their head. And then I started to see people in the organization who didn't normally build code, which is the new thing that has me a little worried. Sales engineers trying to write code. But Copilot has changed how we build software. And so we, when we rolled it out, it wasn't much of a rollout because everybody was already there. And we were just saying, release the hounds. And now, if I were to ask them to stop using it, I think they would be like, this is crazy. Yeah. This is a competitive advantage for us to be able to move this fast.
I'm curious, speaking of that and speaking about the senior devs in particular, using the tool and getting so sped up, I think, I've been speaking about having this tool in flow being a key part, but I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, how important is that? Or how important is it to enable your devs, junior and senior, to have this tool kind of in a single place?
It's critical. It's weird to say that critical. Something so new, like critical. Weren't we doing our work before, right?
Sure.
But something you said earlier when you were talking about this developer happiness, right? That was kind of what was happening to me when I was sitting there just kind of giddy, like going, my gosh, like I just did something that would have taken me hours, and I didn't have to like spend hours doing this. And I see the same thing happening with the team, kind of just enjoying what they're doing, and particularly when that pull request shows up or something comes in and you have no context on the code, you can go ask a question and go, can somebody just explain this to me, please, right? That's, to me, like the most amazing thing, because you can go from knowing nothing to knowing a heck of a lot in a very short period of time. That was always the hardest part. And it's also embedded in our culture that we look for people who have a love of learning, right? That's the #1 priority, because honestly, we're out at this conference right now. There's going to be like 1,000 things when we get back that are brand new. And I'm going to have to ask the team to be experts in all of them, right? So how do we constantly have this kind of love of learning? And AI is enabling that in a big way. It's not just the code, but like being able to learn stuff faster. It's amazing.
Awesome. I mean, so you've spoken about, learning things faster, the giddiness of getting the code in. I'm curious, are there any other takeaways from Copilot or, things that might have surprised you?
Things that surprised me, well, the most interesting surprise to me, but it's just completely kind of chance, is how does it write comments in my voice? That's what I was kind of curious about. I'm sitting here writing a comment, it starts finishing the comment for me, and I'm like, it's got the same snark and Easter eggs that I'm leaving for the other parts of the team in there, which I thought was bizarre in itself, but delightful in some ways. But honestly, I'm more excited about the future, right? Because I think about where we are now and how fast things are moving, how fast we're building new functionality. I'm excited to kind of see this evolve to the point where we have systems that are keeping up with all the things that are going on across the teams, and doing something you also mentioned, kind of getting the other teams to collaborate. Hey, you're working on this. The other team has already built something like that. You're reinventing the wheel. Why don't you go talk to those people? Trying to connect those dots, which is something that, as our team gets bigger, small companies, large companies, I don't think that's possible. But with AI, it actually is, I think. And so I'm very excited about those kinds of things evolving as we move forward. So.
It's interesting, the snarky comment piece, in part because I think when we talk to customers, or I talk to customers and developers, one of the things that they'll inevitably say is a version of, we're very unique here at company XYZ, and it feels like, especially with the comments, a little bit like middle school, like we're all unique in the exact same way, ultimately, and Copilot's able to see right through that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you're a leader of the business, in addition to be a technologist, et cetera.
Well, I tell people that my job as a founder is to fire myself from all the jobs, right?
Sure.
Because you start out having all the jobs, and then you pick the one that you're bad at, and you go hire somebody for that, and you fire yourself, and you keep doing that, and hopefully your company grows, right?
And so, I mean, in doing that, you mentioned that your devs were already using it, and then you kind of locked it in. I'm curious, for folks that are decision makers and other business leaders who are running a startup, kind of what would you say about this journey, or what advice would you give on, adopting AI tools in general or implementing AI in your own apps?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can think about AI these days, right? AI is a technology that we can use to build new features and functionality. AI is a buzzword that I can go drum up some more VC funding, right? But AI is a productivity boost. It really is about how can I iterate and move faster, and being in that flow state when you're iterating is a kind of an amazing outcome in itself. But being able to kind of drive faster and forward, you have to think about it from a competitive perspective, I think. If you're starting a business, or you're starting a company, or starting a new engineering team, the other teams are going to have this. They're going to be out there building and using this, and if you're not, you're honestly handicapping yourself. I truly believe it, and I couldn't imagine building code in the future without it. I don't think anybody is going to write code without it. It's going to continue to improve on how it builds things. I think GitHub CEO even said, and I believe him, something like 80% of code might actually one day be written by AI. And I think that's fantastic, because it means the devs on your teams are going to be 80% more productive, right? They're the ones who are going to be starting that process. So you think about how that sets you apart from your competitors. It's a game-changing kind of advantage, because You just have to be out there moving faster than the next guy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. Thanks for helping tell your story.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Absolute
Eric
pleasure.
Peterson.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think the thing that's so interesting to me about Eric when we were talking about Cloud Zero was in part how the devs were already using the tool, and had similar experience to everyone. But what I also wanted to do was kind of burst a little bubble, because I'm sure a lot of you kind of immediately had some reaction of, okay, well, a startup can easily adopt this, and so that makes sense at one scale. But I think it's interesting to talk about other companies that can adopt at much bigger scale and power a lot of the internet's GDP, a company like Stripe. So to talk a little bit about rolling out AI development tools and productivity at scale, I want to introduce the head of developer infrastructure, Scott McVicker. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. How are you?
Thanks, Kyle.
All right. Day 3, we're almost there. So can you first again tell us a little bit about your role and your remit at Stripe?
Yeah, so I run the developer infrastructure group. We're primarily responsible for building the tools and the platform and the infrastructure that Stripe's internal engineers use to ship features. So that's everything from editors and development environments to sort of our code repositories and sort of code tooling, test infrastructure, test data generation, and then how do we safely get it out to production, the sort of just end-to-end coding.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, looking back at what we were talking about with Eric, like 5 minutes to production and other things, I'm curious, what about sort of Eric's story aligns with your experience and rolling out tooling at a different scale at Stripe?
Yeah, everything Eric says is like basically the same as what we're doing. It's just a slightly larger scale. I think one of the things that really resonated was metrics and sort of measuring. One of the things that I think we do a particularly good job at is how do we understand where engineers are spending their time? So we've instrumented everything from type aheads to linters to how long are they spending searching for code through the entire development workflow. So at a high level, we track branch to master, so when they start thinking about writing the code and they create the branch all the way through until they merge to production. But additionally, we also look at time waiting on machines. So like you're waiting on a computer to get back to you, be it CI, be it a basal build step, be it a linter, and then time waiting on humans. So those are the core components that we use for sort of measuring our productivity. But that's really the quantitative parts. So you might have the fastest tools in the world, but engineers really hate interacting with them. So on top of that, we do sort of a sentiment survey. So a lot of companies have the culture survey they send out, twice, 2 or 3 times a year. So onto that, if you've written sort of 13 PRs in the last quarter, we call you an engineer. So you might be a sales engineer, you might be a data scientist, you might be infrastructure engineer, product engineer, but we really want to understand how do you feel about the tools that you're using at Stripe. So the 3 questions that we really want to understand is, do you feel more productive than you were 6 months ago? Do you enjoy using the tools that you have? And then the last is sort of a text box where we ask, what frustrates you about developing at Stripe? And it's just this the first 2 questions are sort of priming questions, and then the text box is where we really get the value. And we have a couple of thousand engineers. We aim for 90% response rate, and everyone does. So they give us their very, very harsh direct feedback, which we really appreciate.
Yeah.
And then I sort of sit down and a big glass of whiskey and just have a really thick skin and just sort of read these very pointed complaints. But we sort of use that to sort of aggregate how do engineers, or what's frustrating them, what are they mad about, what is really slowing them down. And occasionally it's not things that show up on time waiting on machines. It's, I have to run these 15 scripts in order, and if I don't, I'm going to wait 10 minutes, CI is going to pop back and be like, oh, you forgot to run this one script here. So it really helped us understand the holistic developer experience. And then we use that to sort of prioritize our roadmap. Nothing's really a surprise. It's not like, oh, we've never heard of this before. But it really helps us set the correct prioritization. I think about 18 months ago, the biggest complaint that we had from engineers was around documentation, which is unusual for Stripe because we have like world-class documentation if you've ever looked at the Stripe external website. But internally, it was sort of really challenging for engineers to sort of just track down the documentation. It was siloed across our wiki. Maybe it was inside someone had written a doc, someone had committed it into the code as a markdown file, or maybe it was just comments inside the code. So engineers would get really frustrated that I can't find it. Now, sometimes it just didn't exist, and that's why they couldn't find it. But even if they did find it, was it up to date? Did it make sense? Did it still apply? So the investment we made about 18 months ago was taking the best practices we had from the external site. They're written in a sort of flavor of Markdown called MarkDoc. And we took all of our internal docs, we staffed a few internal tech writers, and we're like, let's sort of get rid of the silos and sort of bring them into, one new silo. I think it's the classic XKCD comic. It's one more standard. But we realized if we gave sort of extra incentives and extra carrots to sort of encourage people to do the right thing, we could have something fun. So earlier this year, we built out an LLM to sort of answer people's questions. So if they pop into Slack, they can ask a question into the support groups that we have for each of the platform teams. The LLM will see it. It'll then ask itself, Slack will see it. It'll ask LLM if this is a question. And if it is a question, what are the keywords? We then take the keywords, throw it to our search, bring back some high quality documents. And then we use that as a prompt for the LLM to then try and answer the questions. And it's been really effective. We went from documentation being our #1 complaint to I don't think it even makes the top 10 anymore. So it was this sort of large change with LLMs that we didn't really know we were going to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was quite exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see Stripe's always had a history of investing in developer tools and having a great developer experience, but a useful way of bringing in AI and LLMs, versus just jamming it in. And so, speaking of which, though, because you measure so much already, I'm kind of curious, as you started using Copilot and testing it out, what did you see? What was the experience given you have all this extra data?
So at Stripe, we have a lot of short-lived development environments. So instead of you switching branches, we just issue you one dev box per branch. So you can do it via the command line tool, which is called Pay, or you can do it via the web UI. And you just give me a new dev box. And we sort of give you one pre-configured, pre-warmed up, checked out with the later master passing tests, with everything pre-warmed up and pre-built. And then we just connect that to sort of VS Code remote. So that is the workflow. So engineers might have 4 or 5 different dev boxes that they're using. While they're waiting on code review for one, they're working on the other one.
Sure.
And then I can't remember when we started using Copilot. I think it was February or March, but I know it was quite early on when you announced it. And I've been using it personally at home for my side projects.
Sure.
I really believe if you're going to be the head of developer infrastructure, you actually have to sort of use the tools and understand what are the engineers, what is their lived experience. So I've been using it at home, and we started a pilot of Copilot, if you will. We picked sort of 200 people randomly across the engineering population, and then my intent was just to survey them 3 times, week 1, week 3, and week 5. We split the population in half, and we offset it, so we get feedback each week. And the feedback in week 1 and week 2 was pretty promising from both cohorts. And then week 3 and week 4, I remember the questions we were asking. The questions were how often are you accepting the change from Copilot? And I think it was 80% of people were saying often. And then we were, would you recommend it to another colleague at Stripe? And that was in the 95%. So we actually just cut the pilot short at the 4-week mark. And we were this is great. We should just roll this out to everyone. And I think to what Eric saw with senior engineers, I think for senior engineers, they already know the sort of code they're trying to write. So they start typing in the first few characters, and then Copilot is you're trying to do this.
Sure.
With people sort of earlier on in their career, They sometimes struggled because they didn't know what they were going to write, but I think with the sort of prompt, it's Copilot X, one of the features for
Copilot
prompt.
chat,
Yeah, Copilot chat.
Yeah.
I think that is going to be more interesting for more junior folks. And then I think for the non-traditional engineering roles, they've been more excited by Copilot because they know what they're trying to do, but maybe they're not immersed in it day to day. So they're able to write code a lot quicker.
Awesome.
Yeah.
To wrap us up, I think kind of asking the same question that I asked Eric. Given you've rolled this out to 2,000 plus people, what advice would you give to folks of similar size or larger, in rolling this out, or what lesson or next step or takeaway would you give them?
Ooh, I think the most recent takeaway that I've been really focusing on this year is that you might have the world's fastest tools, the world's greatest tools, but if engineers don't have uninterrupted focus time to actually sit and sort of do work, get into the flow state, then it can be really challenging. So one of the things that we rolled out, we did an internal sort of pilot where we started just giving managers visibility into what engineers had Swiss cheese their calendar. And we set a pretty low bar. We set it for do they have 3 hours a day with no meetings, uninterrupted? And we're that's focus time. And we sort of picked that based on how long does it take to get a change out. We're oh, an hour seems too sort of short, 4 hours seems too long. We're 3 seems about right. So I think what we started paying attention to was what is the focus time, what is the sort of flow time, because that's really sort of helped unlock that the next step, the next evolutionary step in getting work done. And I think Copilot helps because they can write code faster. So that amount of time they can sort of get more done.
Yeah. Microsoft has shared that based on their internal studies, their average developer spends between 2 and 3 hours a day actively coding, and it's closer to the 2 side. So anything we can do to make that be more productive makes total sense.
Yeah, I think our branched master time is about 3 hours is the goal. So we're always just trying to make sure people have 3 hours.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott McVicker. So again, thanks so much to Scott and Eric for telling the stories about rolling this out, and also telling additional stories about how you're using AI and other ways at work, or at least helping developers. Clearly at this point, I think I've made the point, the AI is helping developers collaborate and innovate so much faster. And I think this innovation next step is a big result of what we've been able to do in this year that AI has been in developers' lives. Is you see a lot more projects, whether that be open source or closed source, are delivering, big change, accelerating human progress, and ultimately developer collaboration. So it's easy to see, how we help on productivity, or how AI helps on productivity. We're making the team more collaborative, innovative, and we're helping with companies like Stripe and Cloud Zero, GitHub obviously, Duolingo. It's how Accenture, kind of the list goes on and on. They're also delivering to their customers. I was joking with Scott and the team about Black Friday. It was a big weekend a little bit ago for Stripe, and Patrick Collison, shared their big news. Same thing, just helping them meet their goals is really our goal. So to close us out, just to reiterate, I think the 3 key points, if this is what you walk away with, is don't get caught up in how you measure. Like Scott said, they had all the measures that they had, all the ways to do this, and by week 4, it was just it's time to act, and they were able to roll that out. So yes, make sure you're meeting your compliance obligations. Yes, have the lawyers double check, meet your regulatory requirements. Start small, but ultimately start now. Don't underestimate the ability for AI to be helpful in upskilling developers or helping them learn on the job. The senior devs example was huge, but ultimately, we're finding with chat, like Scott said, the ability for junior devs to be able to reason a little bit more about how the project is ultimately working. And then finally, this is the one I think I'm the most passionate about. Just make sure your AI tools are completely in flow. Try to avoid bringing in AI tools that have a net new behavior, or I think I'm going to get a shirt made that says no AI buttons or something, where it just add a thing and then it's magically going to do a job. Focus on tools that are completely in flow, so that way your developers or your customers, when you're adding AI, are able to remain in your product for longer. I think this is ultimately what's made Copilot so successful compared to other AI products in the space. And so the best part about being at GitHub for 10 years has been, being able to meet all the developers and all the folks that are using GitHub. So just wanted to say a big thank you to the folks who are in the room, folks watching on Content Hub, watching this online. I'd love to chat with you, and so will the rest of the GitHub team. So please feel free to come to the expo hall. We're at 1196 back in the dev space. There's a bunch of really smart, talented people that would love to talk to you about GitHub, how you're using it, or if you have an ask or a complaint, we'd love to hear that too. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of reInvent.